Good morning, and we appreciate everyone being here. You got someone coming in?
Yeah. Photographer.
Okay. I understand many of the TV are at another press opportunity this morning. As always, we will present this audit. We'll take questions, and then because it is a very complicated audit, if there are follow-up issues you want to be sure you follow up with our technical team, we'll be available all afternoon for any follow-up calls or questions that anyone might have. Today we are releasing a special audit of the Kentucky retirement systems. The audit makes 92 recommendations to strengthen the Board of Trustees' oversight and governance of this agency that manages investments of nearly $13 billion and serves almost 330,000 active and retired members. The audit focused on specific questions surrounding the use of placement agents at the retirement system, the internal audit process, and a broad review of board policies and governance issues. Based on the information reviewed, auditors saw no evidence of a pay-to-play scheme involving placement agents, as have been found in other states, or conflicts of interest that benefited KRS officials. Nor is there evidence that KRS incurred any additional costs through the use of placement agents. However, the audit points to several troubling aspects regarding the use of placement agents, and the report will be referred to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The SEC has the authority to determine if further investigation is needed here in Kentucky. While auditors did not substantiate any specific evidence of wrongdoing, the placement agent review and the broader review of board policies pointed out a number of areas where KRS board could improve communication, accountability, and transparency. There's not another public board in Kentucky that has as significant a level of fiduciary responsibility affecting as great a number of people as the Kentucky retirement systems. To carry out this responsibility, the Board of Trustees needs to be highly qualified, adequately informed, and fully engaged. Our recommendations offer numerous steps that KRS should take to strengthen board governance. Regarding how this audit process began, after questions were raised regarding the use of placement agents by an internal audit, an internal audit was initiated and was presented to the KRS Board of Trustees in August 2010. Placement agents are intermediaries or third-party marketers paid a fee by investment managers to solicit and secure potential investors, such as the retirement systems. The KRS internal audit found no wrongdoing in the use of placement agents, but some KRS trustees questioned the internal auditing process, as well as fees paid to placement agents. In August 2010, Governor Steve Beshear sent a letter to then KRS Board Chair Randy Overstreet, suggesting that the board request the auditor's office conduct an independent review of the adequacy of the internal audit process and other matters related to board oversight. The KRS Board of Trustees subsequently voted to request a review by this office. In our review of the placement agent matter, the audit found that the use of placement agents lacked transparency and may not have been in the best interest of KRS. The audit points out that one placement agent in particular had a very close working relationship, an unusual relationship, with the former KRS Chief Investment Officer, or CIO. And that placement agent received a high percentage of the investment contracts. He participated in 7 of the 13 investment agreements in which placement agents were used, more than all of the other placement agents combined. The placement agent can earn a minimum of $1.3 million in fees from KRS investments that he handled. Additionally, firms that this placement agent was affiliated with could earn nearly $3 million from KRS investments in which he participated. This chart on my left is a summary of all the placement agent fees that are directly associated with KRS investments. There have been a number of different figures that have been used in the press and have been discussed in this matter. We think this is the definitive summary based on all the documentation of placement agent fees that have been paid and that are estimated future payments to placement agents involved at the retirement system. As you can see, that total number is $11.58 million, nearly $6 million, $11.6 million. Are you set, Tom?
I was double parked, sorry. I didn't get notice of your news conference. But go ahead, sorry.
You can't find good help anymore, I'm sorry.
Apparently some people did.
There will be a number of questions, I know, from the press about this issue of specific payments to the placement agent. Okay. This one placement agent in question on this chart is identified as K, the letter K. In the back of the audit, there is a legend that identifies all the various firms and matches them up with these letters. In response to questions, we can get into more detail about what involvement this one particular placement agent had in various firms. This one particular placement agent, identified as K on this chart, appears to have acted as a representative of KRS, setting up appointments and making travel arrangements for the former chief investment officer. That relationship appears to have been different from that of other placement agents who typically have a contract with a particular investment manager. In August 2009, the former chief investment officer participated in the development of a placement agent disclosure policy, which was adopted by the board. Even after that policy was adopted, the CIO, the chief investment officer, did not disclose to the board's investment committee the use of this same placement agent, thereby violating the new policy. That is one of the findings in the audit. It's primarily because of this questionable interaction between these two individuals, the one placement agent and the former chief investment officer, that we are referring this report to the SEC. Both the former chief investment officer, who resigned in July 2010, and the placement agent in question declined to be interviewed by our auditors. The audit recommends that going forward, KRS investment staff and the investment committee members ensure consistent compliance with all established investment policies. We recommend that all information required by the placement agent disclosure policy be presented to the Board of Trustees in a clear and transparent manner. We recommend the disclosure statement for placement agents include political contributions made to Kentucky officials within the past 2 years, though we found no such contributions on the part of this one agent in question. Our report further recommends the General Assembly consider requiring the registration of placement agents as executive agency lobbyists with the Executive Branch Ethics Commission. And, importantly, the report recommends the investment committee of the board receive more detailed information on recommended investments, including what steps were undertaken to locate the firms considered and all individuals or firms involved in identifying investment options. This last recommendation, related to placement agents and outside investment recommendations, would bring more transparency to any outside influences on the process of selecting investment services. In a related matter, as part of our review, auditors followed up on allegations that meetings set up by the governor's office may have resulted in undue influence on KRS officials. The auditor's interviews and analysis of documentation found no evidence of pressure to use specific firms, and no firms which had been identified as having contacts made on their behalf received business from KRS. But this recommendation we make, that board members receive information regarding any individuals or firms involved in identifying investment options, would ensure transparency in the investment placement process. Regarding the internal audit process at KRS, trustees had expressed concerns about the internal audit of placement agents, including inadequate communication, timeliness, and independence. State auditors found that there were inadequate procedures in place for conducting such a special internal audit. As a result, the internal audit had insufficient involvement from the board and resulted in confusion and suspicion among the trustees. In this review, state auditors found no evidence that information from that special internal audit was withheld, delayed, or covered up to hide fraud or wrongdoing. While there was evidence of involvement of the executive staff in the internal audit process, which diminished the perception of independence, auditors found there was no evidence that the outcome of that internal audit was influenced. Going forward, the audit recommends that the KRS Audit Committee develop and approve detailed procedures for special audits requested by management or external sources, and that the KRS Division of Internal Audit conduct all field work in an independent manner separate from the influence of KRS management. Moving beyond the specific review of placement agents and the internal audit process, this audit includes numerous recommendations related to board governance and operational policies. The audit contains specific recommendations to strengthen policies governing budget, conflicts of interest, travel, spending, anonymous reporting of concerns, and consistency in the board's selection process. Among those recommendations are that conflict of interest statements should be required of top investment staff and the general counsel, in addition to the CEO and trustees who currently fill out such statements. The audit recommends penalties should be established for breaches of board policies. While the audit found that the KRS trustees receive a great deal of information, the audit recommends that the information they receive should be more informative and valuable in providing oversight, including that the board should receive quarterly budget to actual expenditure reports, investment expenditure reports, so they understand exactly where and how the investment staff is spending money seeking investment opportunities, and an annual report of executive staff salaries, which, as you know, has been a public issue in terms of the public records aspect of those salaries. The audit recommends that the enacted budget of KRS should include all aspects of expenditures, excluding benefits. We recommend that term limits should be established for the board chair and vice chair. The audit found that the board could benefit from additional external audit services, including scheduling performance audits, compliance audits, and management audits. The audit also recommends steps to make the election and appointment process for the board more consistent and stronger. The qualifications for gubernatorial appointees to this board are dictated by statute, and they help ensure that the KRS board possesses the investment background needed to effectively oversee KRS. However, the elected trustees who come from the employee groups have no qualification requirements. The audit recommends that the same disclosure requirements and application process be followed for both elected and appointed board members. At a minimum, applicants should be required to detail how their specific qualifications prepare them to be an effective trustee, and both types of trustees should authorize a background check. Such information should be available to the governor for the appointed positions and to the trustees before their decision on the final nominees to put forward for election of new trustees. Responding to the audit, the chair of the KRS Board of Trustees stated that the board does not disagree with any of the findings in this audit and that they have already begun implementation of many of the recommendations. That response is included at the end of the audit. Although the purpose of this special audit was not to examine KRS financial statements or investment performance, the report does include a detailed background section on the history and financial viability of the retirement system at the beginning of this report. I think many policymakers and others in the public arena will find this a very informative and helpful part of our report as we look at all of the serious issues the state has to address related to the long-term viability of this system. One overarching concern I want to emphasize is that the long-term viability of this retirement system has been dramatically impacted by the state's consistent underfunding of its employer contributions since 2003. Beginning in 1993, KRS was not fully funded in terms of the recommended employer contribution for 12 of 17 years. And starting in 2003, that underfunding was more consistent and more significant. You can see in this chart on my right is the history of employer contribution rates and net plan assets. That's put together from a couple of different charts in this introductory section of the report, but it's a quick and easy way to see how each year what has been recommended for a contribution is dramatically different from what was actually appropriated. It starts out here in 2002 with 5.89% that was budgeted, and that is what was recommended. And then it begins to shift dramatically till we get to 05. It's actually half of what should have been contributed, and the numbers continue to show a differential going forward. It is critical that future governors and legislators honor the commitment that was made in the 2008 pension reform legislation to continue to increase the employer contribution over the next 15 years to fully fund the retirement system's obligation. Those reforms that were passed in the 08 session will be helpful to the future viability of the system, but the part of the reforms that dealt with new hires after 08 really won't begin to impact the current problem. It'll be many years before we see the results of that. And now, because these actuarially recommended contributions were not made in the state budget over the past decade, national studies have identified Kentucky as having one of the most troubled public pension systems in the country based on unfunded liability. It is important to point out, as we're talking about these larger issues of the long-term financial viability, that this report we released today did not identify any matters that appear to have impacted KRS financial condition. Decisions related to the funding of this system are ultimately the responsibility of policymakers in the General Assembly and the Governor's office. But strong board oversight of the system's assets is absolutely critical. The audit provides a roadmap for the retirement systems board to ensure proper transparency and accountability in its critical fiduciary role. Before I open for questions, I'd like to recognize the audit team who worked on this audit. Brian Likens, the Director of Special Audits, Jetty Sparks to his left, Jim Bondurant, and Tiffany Welch. Also, Julie Skeeters and Les Lau, who are not here today, were involved as part of that team. And they've done an outstanding job of an exhaustive analysis of the system, its issues, every question and allegation that was raised, and coming up with what we believe is a very strong and positive list of recommendations that give this board a roadmap going forward. With that, I'll be glad to open it